So get closer. Short people in front, tall people in the back, just like anything normal where you'd actually like to see something. If you stand behind them, okay, stand behind your kids, you can see over them. Those cards are not what you want, probably. They have things filled out on them already, right?
Oh, I brought them.
Oh, you brought them. Okay, never mind. Okay. All right. So, we're the Southern California Rocket Association. We're the local club with the National Association of Rocketry. So we've got the permit to launch here at the park. We pay a ridiculous amount of rent to use the park. It used to be only slightly ridiculous, and then they almost doubled it last year without telling us. So we didn't raise the fee beyond $2 yet, but if they told us in advance, it would be higher by now because we're losing money every month here. So anyway, when you check in to launch, you'll have a flight card filled out, and it's got the name and age and signature of someone who's 14 or older on it. You put what type of liability insurance you've got. So if you're with a school group or something, you'd write the school name or whatever down if it's an official event. If you're with the Boy Scouts, it would be BSA. For the National Association of Rocketry, it's NAR. If you have nothing, no membership in anything, you're just here as a family, but you own a house with a lovely mortgage, your mortgage insurance covers you for hobby activities because they own your house and they don't want to lose their house should you do something silly and get sued. So you're covered, so you'd circle homeowners in that case if you just own a house. If you're a renter, then you got to check your renter's insurance because who knows what that is. So you circle what kind of liability insurance you've got. Then you write your model's name down. If you know what it is, great. If you don't know what it is, call it something. You could call it Black Rocket if you don't know that it's like an Amazon or something like that. Then for the engine manufacturer and type, it would be like Estes is the rocket engine company that makes a lot of them. It could be Aerotech. And then the type would be like, in this case, is a C6-5 on this card. If you're using our launch system, we have a lot of different launch rod sizes. So you'd circle what size rod you're using so we know which pad to put you on. The bigger rockets need the bigger rods, and I'll talk about that in a second. And of course, it's signed and dated. And then when you get up here, you have your motor out of the rocket, and I check it to make sure it's what you wrote down and that it'll work for the rocket you've got. Because sometimes you pick the wrong motor, and I'll explain why. Or sometimes some of the companies have really bad recommendations, and I'll tell you why. And to prevent your rocket from crashing, why and what you should do, which motor would be better, etc. If I see any obvious defects, I'll point them out and tell you how to fix them if you can, like 5-minute epoxy, re-glue something, etc. Okay, so once I've checked you in, you're going to get a round and a pad number. And every time we load up the pads, it's a round. So we got round 1 right now, and there's only 3 rockets out there at the moment. So we got one on pad 1, pad A, and pad D, and he's going to load another one on pad...
You tell me.
Oh, okay, I get to pick. Okay, that's where'd my pen go? It's underneath the rocket. Okay, so it's going to be round 1. We'll put you on pad 2. There's no point in waiting. Okay, so he's loading them up. I'll keep lecturing. When he's ready, we'll go ahead and launch these, and I'll finish the lecture when they're done launching, just so you can watch them and we don't delay these people any further. Normally, when we have late spring, we have huge scout groups here, and it's such a long line that I do the lecture before we start launching at all, because otherwise we'd get nowhere. So I'll continue. So what goes on inside the rocket motors? How many of you have learned all about the motors and the power designations and all that? So some of you have, but not many. Okay, it's pretty simple. You can get complicated, but it's really simple. There's a letter, a number, a dash, and another number. And sometimes after the last number, they put some extra letters to describe something cool about the motor. But the important stuff is the first letter, number, dash, and number. So this is an A8-3. This one's a B6-4. Well, the letter just tells you how much power can be in the motor. So every time the letter changes, it doubles the class. It's like saying a 1-gallon gas can, a 2-gallon gas can, a 4-gallon gas can. Every time the letter changes, it doubles the range. Now, you could fill it up all the way or not. So some bigger motors, like when you get into the D, E, F range, they may not be a full motor. They may not quite be double a C to be a D or double a D to be an E. So you can actually look online at the actual statistics for the motor. But if it says E on it, that means it's at least more than a D, up to double a D, okay? So you don't have to worry about that too much with the smaller motors. Pretty much all the Bs are double an A, and all the Cs are double a B, and the Ds are almost double of a C for the most part. So once you start getting up there, like a D is equal to 2 Cs, 4 Bs, 8 A motors. That's a lot of motors, you know, so, but that's why the next number is pretty cool. It's the average thrust coming out of the motor in newtons. And newtons is what everyone on Earth uses to measure force except the United States, because we can't count by 10 and use the metric system, according to your politicians. They stuck with the English system. They started going metric in the 70s, and then they rolled it back because some idiot decided to go back in time. Meanwhile, every doctor and engineer and probably some architects have gone metric, but everyone else is stuck with feet. So if you like 5,280 feet in a mile instead of 1,000 meters in a kilometer, well, good for you. So anyway, there's about 4.5 newtons in a pound. So you can have a C6 motor and you can have a C11 motor. Which one has more total power in it? Nope. They're both C motors. They have the exact same total power in them. It's the amount of fuel, total impulse. The C11 has double the thrust, the average thrust. That means it burns up all its fuel twice as fast. So the C6 burns longer with lower thrust. It's like taking your gallon of gasoline and putting it in a leaf blower or a car or a Lamborghini. It's going to use up the fuel at different speeds, right? You can appreciate that, the leaf blower versus the Lamborghini. There will be a much shorter lifespan on the fuel in the Lamborghini, whereas the leaf blower will annoy you for hours. Anyway, so a C11 is great for a big heavy rocket because it'll get it moving faster off the launch rod. And he's not ready to launch it. Whenever you're ready to launch, you can launch, like I said, if you heard me.
You were lecturing.
No, I'll stop the lecture once you launch and then I'll continue again. I don't want to hold these people up.
Okay.
So anyway, so after the average thrust number, there's a dash and there's another number. That's the amount of coasting time after all the thrust is done, where it'll just coast before it blows the ejection charge at the top of the motor to blow the parachute out. And we're going to see that in a few minutes here. There's a bunch of different motor power levels here and different rocket sizes. So this is going to help shorten my lecture now. So we'll watch this and then I'll finish up on it as well.
Basic rules, nobody goes inside the roped area.
We'll do that again for round 2.
Okay.
They know, they've been here before. Let's just do the power level and watching them and stuff.
Introductory comments. Main panel arms, round 1, pad 1. Speed freak, C6-5.
This has a 5-second
3,
coasting
2,
time.
1, start.
1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. And as always with an Estes motor, they're short. So that one actually ejected after about 3.5 seconds, depending on how slow I was counting.
The speed freak, that's got the altitude thing.
Yeah, it's got a nose
which is
cone
normal.
that has a
Parachute
button
there.
on it. It's an electronic nose
Yeah, you'll
cone.
miss 'em.
When it ejects, the button is released and it starts counting till it hits the ground. And there's a little sensor in there that detects hitting the
stuck one
ground
off
if you're
the pad
lucky.
too.
And it counts the number of
AMRAAM,
seconds, and it knows,
C6-3.
because of the math
3,
from falling,
2, 1,
how many feet
start.
it was. So this has a shorter delay, I think, right?
C6-3.
Yep. And that was a heavier rocket with a little more air drag, so that popped just about the top of the flight, which is perfect.
I'm going to track that.
No, you're like, yeah, this is cool, guys. This one's got
Okay, so this is a
airplane.
scale model up there of a missile that they launched from fighter engine wingtips. It's the AMRAAM, I believe that
Yeah, it
was.
was the AMRAAM.
Yeah,
That's
it's
an acquired model I didn't build.
yeah. Okay, it's floating down. He's just watching it because it's his. And when it lands, the next rocket is a boost glider. It goes up like a rocket, and then the glider pops off of it, just like the space shuttle would come off of its booster.
Okay.
They don't always work.
Disarm the main panel, but key up and arm up on the large pad controller. On pad A, we got Shadow Cap Boost Glider, B4-2.
What brand?
Estes.
Okay. So this is a lower thrust for a little longer time than a B6. It's a B4, but only 2 seconds of coasting because a boost glider, it has a lot of wing area with a lot of drag. Plus sometimes they don't go super straight. This one hopefully will go pretty straight though, because it's a good design.
Down. 3, 2, 1, start.
Yeah, that boosted very straight.
Nice.
And then the glider comes off, and it circles around. You can add weight to the wingtip to balance it so that it circles. Because if it glides straight, it would just keep going until it hit Monrovia.
It's coming down. It's going to hit Ms. McKenna.
It's going pretty good there. He could level off the glide if he wanted, but then it would stay up for a very long time, and it could blow away. So that's a pretty nice, tight, but good glide. Okay. Excellent work.
That was good. That was a good glide.
And this is a scale model of a V2, and this time the motor is...
D12-3.
So this is a D motor. It's a D12. So it's got 3 times the average thrust of that V4 you just saw. But it's a D, so it's going to burn just about as long. So, and it's a heavy rocket.
Yeah. Okay. Continuity's good. Counting down. 3, 2, 1, start.
And it's louder. All right, so let's finish the lecture thing. So you can see they use different size launch rods because depending on how heavy the rocket is and the thrust level, it's got to build up enough speed to fly through the air straight. How many of you have had bows and arrows, either toy or real? Okay. Have you ever had any where the feathers were broken or gone? How did those fly? They don't fly straight. No, you need the feathers on the back of the arrow to guide it through the air, just like the fins on the back of the rocket guide it through the air. Everything will spin around its balance point or center of gravity. So if you have a really heavy rocket motor, it really moves the balance point toward the back of the rocket. So you got to have big fins. Plus, the heavier the rocket, the slower it'll accelerate unless you have a really powerful motor. So you got to pick the right launch rod that's stiff enough to hold the heavy rocket and guide it. And by the time it leaves the launch rod, it should be moving fast enough for the fins to guide it. If there's a lot of crosswind, so if the rocket's only moving 50 miles an hour when it leaves the launch rod, and there's a 10-mile-per-hour side wind, it's going to spin. It's going to turn into the wind like a weather vane. And what's the typical weather vane on top of a barn look like? What's it made out of? What is the picture on it? Anyone ever see a picture of a weather vane on a barn? Yes. What? A chicken, a rooster. It's a rooster usually. So they call that weathercocking because it turns like a weather vane. You know, and on farms they call it a weathercock, not a weather vane. Of course, with actual meteorologists, they just have an arrowhead-like thing with a big tail on it, but they don't have a rooster. But airplane and rocket people, they call it weathercocking. So you don't want your rocket to weathercock. You want it to go fast enough off the launch rod. So you got to have good fins. So now let's show you what goes on inside the rocket motor. This is going to be the fun part now. You've got the average rocket motor is a cardboard casing with a clay nozzle. It's got propellant, and like we said, depending on how much propellant you put in there, it gives you the power level. So an A is barely filled with a little bit of propellant, a B has twice as much, and by the time you get to a C, it's filled to the end, and you need a bigger casing to get the D motor. You can take that bigger casing and only fill it halfway, and that gives you your C11 motor. The big fat casing has more surface area, so there's more area burning, so you get a higher thrust level on the C11 in the big fat casing. But then you get to the D12, and they have longer ones, which are E9s and E12s, and then they get big fat ones, which are over there. But the E's are big, and then there's E's and F's that are even bigger than that. I probably have something running around here. Let's see. Probably have an Aerotech one. Oh yeah, here's some of the big ones, and they get longer than that even in the G motors. Oh, they're very loud. You'll see some of those too. So it burns from one end to the other, and we're going to talk about ignition in a second, where we'll do the molten metal demonstration. So it burns from one end to the other. When it gets to the end of the propellant, it hits the delay, which makes some smoke and doesn't generate any thrust. And that's your delay that lets it coast. And during coasting, it's just going to slow down from air drag and gravity. So like we saw, the bigger, fatter rockets have more air drag, they weigh more gravity slowing them down. So you got to pick your delay time proper for your rocket, because a big rocket isn't going to coast for very long. Then at the end of the coasting, it hits the ejection charge, which blows the top of the rocket off. It's a little mini explosion, and you have to protect your parachute from melting and your shock cord from being destroyed with flame-proof recovery wadding. Now here in the park, we don't use, Estes uses, they sell you flame-proof toilet paper. They treat it with a chemical that prevents it from burning. It smolders and then goes out. We don't want to use only this in the park. We want to use a little bit of this. So you take enough of this to make a little cup inside your rocket. So I'm going to give you this back. This is your rocket. This is extra. And we're going to make a cup. We put the shock cord to the side. We make a little cup out of it. And then we take some of the cellulose insulation material that is sold in some but not all hardware stores. It comes in a gigantic bale. You know, many people don't want to buy a bale, but so we get it and we put it into bags and boxes. And it's this fluffy recycled cardboard and newspaper. And when this blows out of the rocket, it's just dust. It doesn't litter the park. This wadding will look like someone dropped the Sunday newspaper out of a helicopter when we have 100 people launching rockets, and it just blows all over the park, and it takes weeks and weeks to decompose in the hot summer. When it rains, it's gone in a week or two, but it's too much of a mess. We don't want to litter the park, so we just use a little bit of the paper, flame-proof wadding, and then we put a bunch of this fluffy cellulose wadding in to fill the rocket 2 to 3 times in length, whatever the diameter is. So if your rocket is about 1 1/3 inches in diameter, like this one, we fill it up about 3 inches in length. And then you know you did it right if you can, and it tastes icky, but it's not going to poison you. It's got boric acid and borax. It's basically like contact lens solution and detergent soaked into the cardboard and the paper, and that helps prevent it from burning. It tastes disgusting, but it won't kill you. You push it in there, and then you go, boom, and you blow it like a blowgun till the paper hits the bottom. Now on most rockets it'll blow all the way to the bottom where the motor mount is. On this rocket it stops here because there's a coupler with a cross member in it. And that's there because they have this plastic launch lug thing. And so it's down here filling up about that much of the tube, which means we've got this much room for the parachute, shock cord, and nose cone. So you can kind of see that in there. We got a little bit of room. So now we're going to fold the parachute. Now normally when we teach a class, we show you how to do a better job of attaching the parachute than the Estes instructions. Estes instructions assume you can't tie a knot as an average American, even though they still expect you to tie this knot. They figure you can't handle all these strings at once and tie a knot. So they have you do this loop-de-loop thing through the thing, right? Where you loop it through itself.
Someone else built it, sorry, I don't know.
Okay, so anyway, this one's good. All the strings are almost exactly the same length, but that's difficult to do doing it the Estes method. Usually one string ends up shorter than the other, and as a result, when your parachute opens, it yanks on the short one first, and that's the first one to break eventually, which will annoy you. Everything that breaks annoys you, in case you forget. So, you hold the parachute from the tip, and you hold the bottom of the strings until it forms a triangle on a nice flat surface. So you've got something that looks like a nice Costco pizza slice. Then you fold it over until that triangle becomes a round table pizza slice. No laughs. None of you have been to Round Table Pizza. Okay. Usually there's some adult who's been to Round Table. Most of them have closed because they cut the pizza into 38 slices, and that's not a slice. You have to use a knife. Anyway, you end up with a nice thin flat sliver, and you fold it over. For a normal rocket, you can fold it over and curl it up and wrap the strings around it like the stripes on a candy cane. You know you did it right if you can let go of it and it opens all by itself. Because if you crumble up the ball of plastic and then the strings get tied around it like a knot, there's no one up there to grab it and unfold it. It will just plummet in a lump down to the ground. So, for this rocket, just to be safe, I'm going to take that triangle, the wedge, and I'm going to fold it in thirds, just so I have a little bit shorter thing. It's a big rocket too. So by folding it in thirds, I made it shorter. It'll still have no problem opening up. You put in the shock cord, so the wadding is in. Then you put in the shock cord, you just tuck it in there. And once the shock cord is in, you can then put in the parachute, feed in the rest of the cords, make sure none of these strings are sticking out, push them all in, and then when you put your nose cone on, it should fit nicely. That one's loose, but not too loose. If it was a two-stage rocket, where the bottom motor fires up into the upper engine and sets it going, you would want the nose a little tighter because it could fall off at staging. See how it came a little loose? It can actually come off when the rocket stages because there's a lot of jerking motion. If you haven't seen the movie Apollo 13, watch at least the beginning of it because they show the staging and they call it the train wreck because you're strapped into your seat and as soon as that first stage engine's cut off, which you're pushing on the bottom of the rocket and you're pressed back into your seat, as soon as the engine's cut off, air drag on the rocket starts slowing the rocket down, but you're inside. So you're an object in motion and you will continue to move at the same speed even though the rocket is slowing down. So the astronauts are thrown, it feels like they're thrown forward and their harnesses have to hold on to them. It's like a train wreck. And then the stage drops off and the second stage ignites, pushing back up on them, and they're bashed back into the seats again. Same thing will happen with your rocket during staging. And if that nose cone comes off, it'll just start thrashing all over in the sky and be a disaster. So you don't want that. You want the nose cone on a two-stage rocket nice and tight. All right, so that's how you prepare it for flight. Your motor would be out in your hand. You have your flight card filled out like we talked about. Now, what gets the motor ignited? All right, let's do that real quick. The average Estes controller used to have 4 AA batteries in it, because they had a special thing called a solar igniter that had 2 thick wires and a teeny little wire at the tip. Just like on a pen light flashlight, the old-fashioned ones, you could use teeny little batteries to heat up that little filament inside there and make light. Well, this would heat up and get the rocket motor going, but those batteries are pretty weak. So we like to have more powerful batteries. So like I've got 9 AA batteries welded together in a little battery pack right here. But for fun today, we're going to use this one. We have a car battery for the club, by the way, which will kill you if you lick your fingers and put your fingers on it. So it's pretty powerful. But we have here 16 alkaline D batteries. A club member's wife does display servicing in the drugstores. There's electric razor display that when you walk by it, it's got a motion sensor that knows you're in the aisle and it starts going. So these are the battery packs from those displays, and she has to replace them over every so many months, even if they haven't been used. So we get a bunch of them which have a ridiculous amount of power left in them. So I've hooked 2 of them up, and we've got a lot of voltage and a lot of amperage. So what I've done here is the Estes controller has had its battery compartment bypassed with a big battery thing here, battery clips, sorry, and so our typical igniters out here that we love to use for the club are called nichrome wire igniters. And what we do is we wrap a piece of nickel chromium or nichrome wire around the tip of a paper clip, and it makes a little loop in the tip of the wire. How many of you have looked inside an electric toaster or a blow dryer while it's running, that is? Someone must have looked in the toaster. What do you, yeah, don't put a fork in it. And you're still alive, it's a miracle. Okay, what do you see in those blow dryers or toasters?
Wires.
And what do the wires look like? And do they have any kind of color?
Yeah.
They're red, meaning they're hot. Very good, they're hot. Because the electricity goes through them and there's a resistance to the movement of the electricity through there and it gets red hot. If too much electricity went through it, it would burn it up. And so when we connect the circuit complete through the wire, through this light bulb, there's a lot of resistance in the LED or light bulb, so this doesn't get hot because there's not that much getting through, but it tells us that the circuit is continuous. If I didn't have it hooked up, the light wouldn't go on. So that's called a continuity light. It tells you that you've got your igniter hooked up, because once you've hooked up the rocket and walked back 15 to 30 feet to the launch controller, if the clip fell off, it's very annoying not to know that, so it's good to have a continuity light telling you that it is hooked up. Now, if your clips are touching each other, you'll still get the light, and it won't work because it'll just short circuit right through the clips. You need the electricity to go into the wire and out again. 3, 2, oh, by the way, when I push the button, it bypasses the light bulb and sends all the electricity it can through the wire and to the igniter. So you'll get some resistance from the wire, but there should be enough left to go through that igniter to heat it up. 3, 2, 1, 0. Can you see the heat?
Nope. Yes.
It's turning red if you look at it up close. You can get closer if you want, okay? Anyway, I'll hook the wire up even closer, and you'll see it gets a little redder.
Every moment.
It doesn't. Their igniters just get hot. They don't have a little match part.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that too. So 3, 2, 1, 0. Can you see the red? Yeah. And again, I don't have these hooked on real tight at the moment, so they're getting a little resistance from that. But so, what is the difference? This is just a piece of nichrome wire that gets hot. With the car battery, it'll turn to molten metal. It'll actually melt in half. But with this one, it just gets hot. But it's hot enough to get the motor going. So let me wrap this back up, and then I'll show you the rest, and then we're pretty much done except for the check-in and stuff. So we have a lot of these controllers that have been adapted with the bypass on them. So if you wanted to get one, they're pretty cheap. You can even trade in an existing controller for just a few bucks and just trade it for one. And I've actually got free battery packs while they last, so that's good too. Those free batteries we got. Okay, so the original igniter, the solar igniter, had a black match head-like material on the tip. So when the wire heated up, it would catch fire like a match head. They changed them and they now call them solar starters. And they don't have the match head material on them, they just have a clear material just to prevent the wire from cracking or getting damaged as easily. So the wire will still get hot, but it's got to be touching the propellant because it won't ignite it otherwise if there's an air gap. Quest still makes a flaming thing on the tip of theirs called the Q2G2 igniter. So that's another rocket company. And Aerotech makes one with a huge amount because Aerotech makes these gigantic motors that have the space shuttle solid rocket motor propellant in them and missile propellant. Basically, the space shuttle motors have a lot of aluminum powder in them, so they make white smoke. So that would be like the white lightning propellant. The missiles use a more pure propellant that has no smoke because you don't want anyone to see the missile coming at them. You don't want to see a smoke trail. So they just put out a flame with no smoke, and that's called Blue Thunder. It's very pure and ridiculously powerful. It takes a lot of heat to get that propellant started. So it makes a huge match head-like thing on their igniters. And if anyone's flying those, you can see those later and how they ignite, because you'll see the igniter go, and there may be a half a second lag before the engine comes up to pressure and starts going, which is kind of cool. All right, so that's the different types of igniters and starters. You'll fill out your flight cards, you'll get the good wadding in your rockets, and you'll line up here. The first person in line will be here, and you'll go along the ropes, touching the ropes. After you check in, if that round is open, you'll go hook up your rocket on the pad. If you're too short, get a tall person to help you. If you're checked in for a future round, because sometimes we fill up all the pads and you're checked in for the next round after that, that's why you got to remember your round number, you'll just wait up there by the yellow sign along the ropes there. And you'll just wait till your turn, and that's pretty much it. So it's pretty simple, and if there's anything else we need to tell you about, we'll teach you that as we go along, including before the next round launches. We'll talk about not catching other people's rockets and stuff like that, but we'll get to that. All right, thank you very much. Any other questions at the moment?